My name is Tim Passons. I'm involved in the Fulton County Asthma Coalition, myself and my wife, Sarah. And we've been involved since our daughter Brennan passed away in October of 2011. Our daughter was not what you would consider an asthmatic. She had mild asthma. It was more of an irritation. It was more seasonal. And the night of October 10th, 2011, something different just happened, and we couldn't figure out what. However, she had a severe asthma attack. At least that's what we thought it was. And she basically died within an hour. Our goal, and this all stems from things we've learned since her passing and things that at the time were beyond our control, but our goal is, one, how do we ensure better education of emergency personnel, whether it's paramedics or firefighters or policemen. How do they recognize the symptoms of asthma, and what did they do to properly treat it? On the night she passed away, although my wife clearly stated in a 911 call that she was having some sort of odd asthma attack, she was not provided any medications that evening by emergency personnel. So that's our first goal, is to better educate them on how to recognize and treat asthma or an asthma attack, and what medications should be implemented.
Hi, I'm Francesca Lopez, Program Manager for the Georgia Department of Health Asthma Control Program. The mission of the Georgia Asthma Control Program is to improve asthma control across the state and reduce its burden. Our primary population of concerns are 0 to 17 years of age, and how we're doing that is we're focusing our efforts on policy and systems changes as it has to do with the environment, the healthcare infrastructure, as well as self-management education for family caregivers and children with asthma.
My name is Bernadette Wright, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors for HPAC, which is the Health Promotion Action Coalition. HPAC is the organization that serves as the umbrella or governance organization for different coalitions, including the FAIR Coalition. How would I do individually as a member of the coalition? The board is responsible for making sure that coalitions such as the Healthy Heart Coalition, the FAIR Coalition, the Diabetes Coalition, and Smoke Free Coalition are able to integrate and work together. For example, Healthy Heart is here today to support the Asthma Coalition, and by gaining this type of knowledge or information, we're able to go back to the table and make sure that all the coalitions are kind of on the same page and are able to interact to make sure that the objectives are being met across all spectrums.
Thank you again for being here. And Tim, if you just get up and wave at them, we have you on the panel, but Tim Passons is right here, who's Brendan Passons' dad, and thank you for being here. And please know that we are here for you for any support, for any education you want to take to the community. We want to be the voice. So Richard Johnston, I have the pleasure of introducing Richard next. And Richard is the kind of guy who doesn't beat around the bush. If you know him, he just gets straight at you and tells you what it is, whether you like it or not. And he's done that to me many times. And I know when his face goes red, I need to stop. But knowing me, I don't stop. So Richard, thank you for being here. Thank you for volunteering in our coalition. Every Wednesday morning, throughout the 3 years, he's led the conference call and the team of volunteers. Rain or shine, he's always there leading the conference call and hosting the conference call for all of us and keeping the momentum. He never stopped. So thank you, Richard, for being here. And in interest of time, you have the panelists' bio in your folder. So you can look at his accomplishments and achievements. And Richard, it's your turn to educate us. Thank you.
When we first started the Asthma Coalition, the impetus of it came from this year as the Health Promotion Director of Fulton County. And we had a series of formation calls that we talked about the things that were being done. And what basically eventually came out of those conversations is that People were going to the emergency rooms and being treated by a pulmonologist. People were going to allergists and being treated by the allergists. People were going to their drugstores and they were buying drugs. And it was not well coordinated between all of the different players. And so what we decided to do was to first of all look at the piece that was not happening. And the one piece that we felt like was not happening was the environmental piece. So what was happening is people were going to their hospitals or the emergency rooms or their doctors or their allergists or whatever, and then going back to the same environment that may have caused them to be ill to begin with. So over the period of time, we came up with the notion of this integrated care model, which you see up on the top there, where when someone has an asthma attack, like say that they come from the emergency room, that they're looked at by the allergist, they're looked at by the pulmonologist, they're looked at by the pharmacist, they're looked at in their environmental piece, so that the people are not just getting well at the emergency room and then being sent back to the same environment that may have been making them sick to begin with. So from our perspective, one of the missing pieces was the environmental piece. And my role in the coalition was to focus on that particular piece. And so that's the nature of my presentation today. So what I want to do is talk to you about the things that have led up to the kind of problems that we now have in the indoor environment. Following World War II, we started a housing boom. And in order to supply things for the housing boom, we started replacing plaster walls and hardwood floors with paper-covered walls and with carpeting on the floors. Primarily for cost purposes, but also for the expediency of getting things done. About the same time as the industrial engine had ramped up from the war and changed over to peacetime things, we started having some serious problems with the air that we breathe. And in 1955, we passed the first Clean Air Act. It was during this period of time that the word smog was developed to talk about the particles in the air. And what we found was that those particles in the air were going to be a big problem, and the promise in passing the first Clean Air Act was that we would have much better breathing problems. The problems that we had with breathing back then would gradually disappear, and everyone would be breathing healthy. One of the things that I wanted to ask each of you, if you hold up your hands, how many people here look at the ingredients of the things that they buy when they buy for food? So almost everybody does. And how about that they're concerned about what touches them? You know, that they wash their hands or that they buy clothing that doesn't irritate them and things. How many people pay attention to those kinds of things? Okay, how many people look at the ingredients of what's in the air that you breathe? Not too many of you, right? And that's pretty much a problem. And one of the problems that has brought that on is that the food producers that can have a better food product can do all kinds of advertising and tell you about all the evils of their competitors and all the good things that they provide. And the same way with the clothing that you wear, or the notion of washing your hands and selling soap products and cleaning products and all that kind of stuff. So who sells you the air that you breathe? Nobody. And so nobody's advertising for that. You have a medical community that's focused on allergies, for instance. You have a community that's focused on selling drugs, and you hear all kinds of things about that being advertised, but you don't hear about the indoor air quality. So when we set out to do this, that was one of the things that we wanted to bring to the attention. Now, after the first Clean Air Act was passed, shortly thereafter, we came out, the Surgeon General came out with the first report about smoking. And if you go back and look at that, you're going to find out that had a lot of the chemicals in the smoke and things that were bad for you in the smoking were particles in the air. They were basically forms of the smog. In 19 in the early 1970s, the EPA was formed. One of the first things that they did was that they looked at the particles that were being talked about in the smog and in the legislation for the Clean Air Act. And they started categorizing the size of the particles. And the ones that they thought to be the most important were the respirable particles, those particles that you get down into your lungs. About that same time, and that was really the first time where people were aware of the fact that particles in the air could cause you problems far more serious than just the breathing difficulties of being dust in the air. They could actually be carcinogens, it could be toxins and other kinds of things that you could be breathing in the air. Then in the early 1970s, around 73, 74, we had the OPEC oil shock. And that's when everybody started to get really energy conservation, concerned about energy conservation. So we started putting double pane windows in our house. We sealed up all the nooks and kind of crannies. Following the war, we converted over to forced air from boilers and radiators. And so now we started to try to make those a lot more efficient, and so that they wouldn't come on as often. We wound up putting more insulation in the walls, we put more insulation in the ceilings, and we started to really tighten up the envelope of the home. Now, when I say home, I mean buildings as well. And our keynote speaker today is going to talk about the influence that this has in schools. So the same thing happened in commercial buildings. By the early 1980s, there was an alarm started to be raised about the quality of the indoor air. And this was the period of time when the phrase sick building syndrome was coined. At that point, people started to become aware of it, but they really didn't do much about it. So let me summarize what we've done and what we know about how we've done so far. We exchanged low mold growth plaster and hardwood floors for high mold growth carpets and paper covered walls. We added coatings to block bacteria, killing UV rays, to double pane windows with weather stripping to prevent air filtration. We wrapped the envelope of the home with Tyvek and caulked any seams to prevent air and moisture from leaking in or out. We cheapened the quality of the shingles and roof decks and used 4 staples rather than roofing nails to install the shingles, leaving them more vulnerable to wind and rain damage. We invented synthetic stucco that absorbed moisture and mixed asbestos in many of the interior materials. We put R19 insulation in the walls and piled 20 inches of insulation in the attic to prevent the furnace or air conditioner from running, reducing any dehumidification or filtration they might have provided. We invented bathroom vents and cooking hoods that recirculated the air rather than exhausting the fumes and moisture. We used water pipes that deteriorated from the chlorine we introduced into our water. And if the building was a home, we set the sealed box on top of the mold-incubated basement or crawl space, which we didn't condition, and put the HVAC system in that spore-laden environment where it could draw in the contaminated air and broadcast it throughout the home. We installed a filter that was incapable of capturing mold spores and respirable particulate in a place that was difficult to access to change filters. Set the thermostat on auto to save energy, and then made the HVAC so efficient that it hardly came on anyway. We filled our homes with possessions that gave off hundreds of chemicals, used pest control and cleaning chemicals that could make us sick, added humidity-raising hot tubs, and took more frequent humidity-raising showers. We then set the thermostat higher in the summer to save energy, degrading its ability to filter the air and provide humidity control. So what could possibly go wrong with our indoor air environment with that kind of situation? Now, Europe was ahead of us in this indoor air quality issue, and particularly in Sweden and Northern Europe. They started looking at what was happening in the indoor environment, and one of the things that they did to do their analysis was they focused on the particles that were in the air and culturing of dust to find out what kinds of things were being influenced in the indoor environment. In the early 1990s, and incidentally, we didn't have the first indoor air quality national summit until 1990, and interestingly, the keynote speaker was not from the United States, it was from another country. In 1990, there was an investigator by the name of Steve Vesper that worked under an EPA grant. And what he did was he took carpet dust from around the country and cultured it and analyzed what was in there to find out the history of intermittent events that were going on within that home. What he did was he took and he broke those mold spores into two groups, 26 in one group and 10 in another. And he took a ratio of those, and if the ratio was higher than the average, it turned out to be that that was considered to be a more moldy home. And a more moldy home meant that it had higher humidity levels, it wasn't getting good filtration, and there very well may have been housekeeping issues associated with that. So he compared this to people that were having symptoms, and there was a study done in North Carolina that used this and correlated these higher contaminated homes with health concerns. A seminal study that was one done and we refer to frequently was done by the Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And what they did was they used the ERMI to decide who had a higher than average indoor air problems. And they divided children who had been in the emergency room twice in the previous year or hospitalized once in the previous year into two groups. And they went into one group and they cleaned up their environment. They spent no more than about $3,000, I think, average, but they removed mold materials, they took care of the filtration and dehumidification and things. And then 10 months following that study, there was a 10-fold reduction from that group in emergency room visits and hospitalizations compared to the group that they didn't do anything in their home. So that really demonstrates how much the indoor environment can influence the health of all of us. There are another study up in Chicago, I think, that they showed a 65% reduction. There was a study up in New York and Boston that showed similar results, although they included some of the other things that are related to it, like cockroaches and rodents and that type of thing. So we know that the indoor air environment can make a huge difference in what it is that what you breathe and therefore your health. In about 2 years ago, I think in 2013, the World Health Organization declared background particulate to be a carcinogen of greater consequence on a global basis than secondhand smoke. So what it really points out is the importance of the indoor air quality has on it. There are some studies that suggest that 10 to 30% of all diseases that are associated with particles originate in the indoor air. What we found when we look at the outside sample is that the average indoor particulate is 1.5 to 2.5 times what it is in the outdoor air. And we're not really talking about it. Recently, or a year or so ago, Atlanta got kudos from the EPA and got an award because Atlanta was successful in reducing the outdoor air particulate by 25% over the last 15 years. 1.5 to 2.5 times higher particle counts in the indoor air, and nobody's talking about it. Now, the thing about it is that this is so simple to fix. The filters that most people use in their homes are incapable of capturing respirable particulate. And we do find that higher levels of higher size particulate is having a greater influence on our health than was previously thought. But according to Consumer Reports, 25% of the people in the country either don't change their filters regularly or they don't have a filter at all. The ones that we do have, if you go through all the apartments in Atlanta, you're going to find these fiberglass see-through filters that are statistically incapable of capturing mold spores or background particulate. And when we go into those places where they're having health concerns, oftentimes we find that the particle counts are real serious problems. Now, another thing that we look at is the mold spores. From an airborne standpoint, we keep in mind we go into homes that are more likely to have a problem. The outdoor average spore count in the homes that we studied were 1,400 spores per cubic meter. The indoor spores were 24,000 spores per cubic meter. I don't think that that's typical. I would say that the average home might be in the 2,000 to 3,000 spore count, but that can still be a serious problem. We also do carpet dust analysis. And in the carpet dust, in 2012, we found an average of 181,000 spores per cubic meter in the carpet dust, with a substantial percentage of those being associated with moisture content. The following year, now that was a particularly dry year here in Atlanta, and the following year, if you remember, was a particularly wet year. And what happened there is that we had a pretty good sized spike, like a 20% spike or more, based on the increased humidity that we had in Atlanta for that year, which really demonstrates the importance that humidity plays in the indoor environment. So what did we get for the $1 trillion that we spent for taking care of the outdoor air that everybody promised we were going to be able to breathe wonderful and not have a problem with breathing? Back in 1955, we had the pollution. This starts in 1955 when we did the Clean Air Act. And the bottom line, the black line, is a composite of the particles that they've taken out of the outdoor air. By any measure, the outdoor air has improved significantly over that period of time. In the meantime, asthma has increased some 400%. So the question is, how could that possibly be? They're taking care of the outdoor air. That's what we thought everybody was breathing. Well, keep in mind that one of the places that we breathe the outdoor air is indoors. And if the indoor air is more polluted than the outdoor air, we can have a serious problem with that. So if you look at a break here where the question of asking why in my framework here. So the question is, the outdoor air. Is it the outdoor air? Well, back then the EPA said we spend 40% of our time outdoors, and now we spend 10% of our time outdoors. So it's unlikely to be a result of the outdoor air that this increase in humidity and in asthma that we've had. The next question is, could it be for medications? Now, I grew up an asthmatic, and I know that back in the 1950s, there were virtually no medications that you had. The first medication that came out was called Asthma, and came in a little bottle, and you poured it into a nebulizer, and you could squeeze it and get a mist that you could breathe and get some kind of temporary relief. Other than that, there's probably not there hasn't been much of a problem. Today you go into a drugstore and there's a jillion products in there, and there's all kinds of alternatives, and you can get a prescription for 6 different inhalers that do various things for rescue. There's a bunch of them for long-term control. There's all kinds of allergy medications. So the next question is, could it be explained by genetics? Geneticist says you can't do that. You'd have to double the population that had asthma every generation in order to come up with that, and that just statistically is not capable of being true. So the next question is that allergens. I can tell you there are certainly some food allergens that may have not existed back then, but by and large, all the same allergens that we have today, we had back in the 1950s. We have the same pollen outdoor, we have the same grasses outdoor, we have the same house dust, we have all the same kinds of things that we had back there that were allergies for us. So it can't be explained by allergies. How about access to health care? Back then, we had like a doctor in the family, in the community that we would go to. Today, there's a doc in the box on practically every corner. You just can't hardly get away from health care. And we have all kinds of delivery methods now that didn't exist back then with the Medicaid, the Medicare, Peach Care, and the Affordable Care Act, and all the different kinds of things that we have now for access to health care. That's not going to explain it as well. So what about the indoor air? We used to spend 60% of our time indoors. We now spend 90% of our time indoors. And as I pointed out to you, we've created an envelope around our buildings because of the energy issues, the financial issues of energy that has caused a much higher level of pollution in the indoor air today than there was 40, 50 years ago. So that is a very good possibility of where this is coming from. So what can we do about it? There's 4 very very simple things to do. The first is filtration. These filters, these see-through fiberglassy filters, are incapable of capturing respirable particulate. You need to have a filter, they have ratings on them, that has a minimum of a MERV 10 rating. A MERV 10 rating will go down to 1 micron. A MERV 8 rating will go down to 3 microns, and that will take care of mold. But to get down to the respirable particulate, you need a MERV 10 filter. Now, I've talked to the manufacturers, and they've assured us that they've put in writing that they'll handle the MERV 8 without any problem, and they will handle the MERV 10, but they won't put it in writing for me. So they're certainly capable of handling it in terms of the filtration. The second thing, the big thing that filters can also do, even though we're talking about filtering out the respirable particulate, it'll also take out the mold spores. It'll take out the dust mite detritus. If you think about how kids get dust mites, they don't get dust mites by eating dust mites. They get an allergy reactions by the detritus that you get from the dust mites. And the filters will help take care of that, as well as cockroach detritus and rodent debris. So the next thing is housekeeping. People say, well, gee whiz, where am I going to get the money for, we talk about $10 for a filter. Go without a meal and save your family for 3 months. But housekeeping isn't costly. Anybody can go and do good housekeeping. And that's one of the primary things that you have to do. Use a HEPA filter vacuum cleaner, vacuum if you have carpets, vacuum your carpets, dust, make your house healthy for your family. And the third thing is dehumidification. And the dehumidification is just required in Atlanta. All mold needs to grow and mold can be surrogate for bacteria and viruses and a bunch of other things. If you can hold the humidity down around 50% at 70 degrees, you're going to severely retard the growth of any mold spores. The second thing that you're going to do is you're going to keep dust mites from really populating your house, because dust mites absorb the moisture through their exoskeleton, and there won't be enough moisture for them to be able to survive. So over a period of about 6 or 8 weeks, if you hold the humidity at that level, they'll gradually die off. They also, everybody knows that moisture attracts a lot of other insects, like cockroaches and rodents and that type of thing. And so controlling the humidity makes a huge difference on that. And it will also make a difference on the bacteria in your home and the other things that we're finding in the home that are associated with moisture. And one of the other things that we do is we do a carpet dust, because when you measure the air, you're measuring a snapshot in time and it changes. So carpet dust, like if we took a dust sample here out of this carpet, we can culture that and we can get a history of intermittent events. And what I've done in our statistics, we keep track of people that have symptoms and keep track of the results. And what I found is that the people that report symptoms like headaches, respiratory problems, allergies, and a bunch of other symptoms are, we've done a ratio of the ones that have reported those symptoms versus the ones that didn't. And there are 70 different spore types out of the 150 that we found that show that people are far more likely to report health symptoms if they have those particular spores, about 30 of them just for their presence, and the rest of them based on volume that they have. So we know that those things and the things that affect the indoor air quality have a huge effect on the indoor air that we breathe. The final thing on the bottom there is we call makeup air. And this is something that the large office buildings do by law. What they do is they pipe in some fresh air into their cold air tunnel before the filtration and before it's conditioned. And they slightly pressurize the building, like this building has makeup air in it. And what happens is every time you open and close the door, some of the air goes out. Every time you turn the bathroom fan on, some of the air goes out. So it gradually turns over the air. There's a study by the National Institute of Health that reports that the indoor air from a chemical standpoint is often 2 to 5 times as polluted as the outdoor air, in some cases up to 100 times as polluted. And something as simple as a little small amount, maybe 5% of makeup air coming through your HVAC system can cause that to be diluted, just like it does in office buildings where they do it for carbon dioxide gases. So that is my presentation. And the important thing that I want you to take away from this is what we breathe matters. And the fix is very simple. If we do these things, it's very likely, the statistics show and all the studies show, we can reduce the incidence of asthma-related emergency room visits and hospitalizations by more than 60%. Presently, 25% of all the emergency room visits in the country are associated with breathing difficulties that cost something in excess of $12 million. An average asthmatic family spends between $3,500 and $5,000 a year per asthmatic for not only their medications, but their lost work days, their lost school days, and the other things associated with being an asthmatic. So the amounts of money that we're talking about are huge, and the fixes are very simple. So what we want you to take back on here is, as part of the integrated care model, as part of being the pulmonologist and allergist, the caregivers, the pharmacists, include indoor air quality as one of the things that you talk about, because it can make a substantial difference. It makes no sense to get a child healthy and then send them back to the same environment that caused them to be sick to begin with. Thank you very much.